So today's session is going to be on how to tackle case studies in the ethics paper, right? So a few basic things about the case studies which are asked in ethics paper. It is section B of the ethics paper. You will be asked around 6 case studies and it weighs for 120 marks in total, right? So this is the weightage and the syllabus mentions only one line for this section, and that is case studies on above issues, right? So whatever keywords or syllabus is mentioned for the section A in the ethics paper, that is forms the basis of what kind of case studies are going to be asked in section B, right? Okay. So moving on to how to prepare the case studies. Now we have a few things that we have to keep in mind while attempting a particular case study, right? So the first thing is that you must focus on the structure, right? So essentially, when you're solving a case study, it is like problem solving, right? If you don't have a structure in your answer, then it'll appear very haywire or random or haphazard, right? So you need to have a proper structure and an approach to solve case studies. If you don't have this and one day you're doing something, the next day you're doing something else, what will happen is you will have randomized thinking, and secondly you will always be confused on which approach to pick during the examination, right? So this preparation needs to happen before you sit for the examination, and that is why structure is extremely important in solving a particular case study. It also gives a logical flow to your answer, and it helps avoid confusion at the last minute. Anyway, case studies are extremely difficult to complete in the exam, looking at the recent trends of ethics papers. It's very time consuming, and that is why you need to be ready with certain frameworks that you can use to tackle the different case studies. We'll discuss more about this in the future slides. The third thing is that you have to focus on the keywords, right? Whatever keywords are mentioned in the case study, that you have to use and brainstorm for framing your answer. We'll see about that in the example that we discuss later on, right? So the keywords are your milestones or your guiding lights, which will help you in forming your answer, right? The main crux of a case study is identifying the root issue. Unless and until you are able to do that, your answer will not hit the bullseye, right? It has to meet the demand of the question, and that is why it's extremely important that you identify the root issue. The other two things, one thing I've already told you about is time management. Ethics case studies are becoming extremely time consuming in recent years. And that is why you will have to practice beforehand that you are able to finish your ethics case studies in the proper time frame with legible, neat presentation. Right? You cannot just write anything and everything. There has to be a proper sequence and there has to be good presentation. Right? Now we move on to certain other things that you have to keep in mind while answering case studies. Yes, so the case studies have to be logically structured, as I've already mentioned. Your arguments should be consistent with each other, right? You cannot say one thing in the first paragraph and say the completely opposite thing in the second paragraph. Although both the things, both the arguments are going to be equally valid, but you have to maintain a consistency in your answer. Whatever stand you are planning to take, your answer has to be according to that, because case studies are very subjective in nature. One person might take one particular stand and two people might take a completely opposite stand, right? So what is important is robust reasoning, but you have to justify your stand with reason. Your stand should be fair, it should be lawful, and it should be ethical. You cannot say something illegal in your stand, right? Even though you might feel that that is the ethical thing to do. Your decisions in a particular case study have widespread impact, right? So you have to imagine yourself to be in the shoes of the civil servant who is facing that particular problem. So your decision is going to have widespread ramifications, and which is why your decision has to be balanced and neutral. One example that I have mentioned is during the COVID-19 pandemic, there was this question that who will get vaccinated first, right? People who need to get vaccinated, or should we first experiment or use the vaccine on other ages of the population and then see how the impact is, right? Then whatever stand you are taking, you have to mention the merits and also address the demerits. There, you cannot say that there are no demerits to a particular stand. You have to mention both the things, merits as well as demerits, and you have to say how you can minimize the impact of the demerits. And plus, you have to address all parts of the question which have been asked in the case study, right? Okay, now we move on to the structure. So this is a basic structure that I have given you. You can customize it according to your own needs and according to the demand of the question, right? So the structure here is a step structure. You have step one, identifying the facts of the case. Step two, identifying stakeholders and their interests. Step three is identifying ethical dilemmas before the decision maker. Step four is brainstorming possible courses of action. Step five is choosing one particular course of action. And step six is conclusion, right? So now in the next slides, we are going to discuss each step and what exactly you are supposed to do while doing that particular step. So, step one, right? Identifying the facts of the case. Whether the question asks you to summarize the case or not, you have to do this for your own understanding and benefit, because the case studies are going to be very long and you won't have enough time. Right, Lavkesh, I will try to go slower. So, you won't have enough time to read the question thrice or four times, right? So, what you have to do is you have to ensure that whenever you are reading the question, you become clear about the demand of the question, right? So, in identifying the facts of the case, I see someone has raised his hand. Who is this person? Okay, it's Lavkesh only. Right. So when you identify the facts of the case, while doing one quick reading of the question, you just understand what it is about and what is being asked. Don't try to remember everything in the first go, right? Do one quick reading to know what the case is talking about. Now, in the second reading of the case, underline all the facts or mark the points of the case, right? Now, after the second reading, you should not have to go back to read it again, right? So you have to underline whatever is important in the case and just mark it, right? When you are doing this, also go through the questions that have been asked so that you underline whatever is relevant to answer those questions. Rest of the things you can just leave, right? This will help you ensure that you don't miss out on any point of importance, and it will help you think better. It will help you approach the case in a more rational manner, right? Now, if the question asks you to list issues in the case, this helps identify the main issues that are involved. Okay. Now, do keep in mind from whose perspective the final questions have been asked. For example, a doctor will have different considerations in the same situation when you compare with a district collector or a police inspector or a corporate employee. So you always have to keep that in mind, that who is the decision maker, in whose shoes you have to decide, right? There are going to be 6 different case studies. The decision maker will be different in every case study, right? So this is one key point that you must remember while identifying the facts of the case. Now we move on to the next slide, which is the next step, identifying stakeholders and their interests. The next thing that you have to do is identify who all people will be affected by the decision that you are supposed to take, right? Or they might have an interest in the issues which are highlighted in your case study, right? So, for example, it can be one person, organization, institution. It can be a social activist. It can be corporate organization or trust or even environment, biodiversity, and society for that matter, right? For example, if you are asked something about the recent controversy on Adi Purush, right? So, who are the stakeholders which are involved? So there's the filmmaker, there's actors, then you have the film certification body, the audience, society, right? So a lot of stakeholders are involved in that particular situation. So you must identify who are the key stakeholders who are mentioned in the particular case. Now, all stakeholders will have different objectives and motives, and they will have different interests and preferences. So, if you are asked to answer a question from a particular stakeholder's point of view, you have to think from that person's perspective, because then your interests and your preferences are going to be aligned with that personality, right? Now, each stakeholder tries to meet his own objective, and these interests will often conflict with each other, right? So, if you are a corporate organization, you have a profit motive, and you cannot say that profit is a wrong motive, right? Because everyone wants to earn more, earn a reasonable amount of profit. But greed for excessive profits at the cost of exploiting their employees, exploiting the society, exploiting the environment, that is something which is incorrect. So remember that you have to distinguish your stand with rational, neutral, and proper reasoning, right? And you have to do this while identifying yourself with the stakeholder from whose perspective you are asked to think. Okay, now we move on to the next step. Basically, another I just wanted to tell you, an innovative way to show stakeholders is to make a stakeholder map. So now this is an example that you can see. You can change this diagram with the specific names of the people who are involved, right? Now drawing this in the exam shows that you have identified key persons who are getting affected by the ethical issues involved, and it's a good value addition thing. It will take less space, right? And you can show the examiner that you have identified who all will be getting affected by the particular decision. So here you have different stakeholders like social activists, government, vulnerable population, family, society, organization, and your decision maker, right? Okay, so now we move on to the step 3, which is identifying ethical dilemmas before the decision maker, right? So now the first thing is, what is a dilemma? Now, a situation in which a difficult choice has to be made between two or more alternatives, especially ones that are equally undesirable, right? So, in a dilemma, both the options or all the options that you are facing might be equally desirable or equally undesirable, right? So, that is a dilemma. Now, here you should list down a list of dilemmas, conflicts, values, and precedents, if any. So, in the exam itself, if you start attempting your first case study, you will not know which values, which conflicts, what is moral dilemma, right? What all can you write in the paper? So, this preparation again, you have to do it beforehand. And where do you get the fodder for this? It is your section A, right? So, different kinds of moral dilemmas might be personal interest versus public interest, right? love for the family versus doing what is right, right? So these things, you have to list down in the exam. If you are asked to list down what are the dilemmas that the particular stakeholder is facing, now you should list down conflicts of values and not resulting actions here. So here you just have to mention the values. For example, integrity, your own integrity versus loyalty towards the organization, right? So you are just listing down values and not the actions or the consequences. So one other example of categorizing dilemmas is, what are your personal dilemmas, what are your organizational dilemmas, social dilemmas, and with respect to the government. You have to escalate this progressively. First, focus on what is your personal moral value, which is getting compromised in the particular situation, or if you have to choose between two personal values. Then move on to your organizational values, then your social values, and then finally your what is legal or what is ethical as per the governmental rules and regulations, right? Okay, so now I will show you an innovative way to show dilemmas, which is to make a matrix of values, right? So if you are asked a particular question and you don't have time with respect to ethical dilemmas, you don't have much time to note down in the exam hall, what you can do is just make a matrix and list down the personal, organizational, governmental, and social dilemmas there, right? So it'll take up less space, it'll also be more crisp, and you will have addressed the question, right? So you will be provided with a list of keywords for values, dilemmas, conflicts, and precedents in your notes, and you can use them for maximum value addition in your case studies, right? Now we move on to the step 4, which is brainstorming possible courses of action. So yes, so without judging the validity of the actions that you can think of, when you are asked to list down all possible courses of action, you list down every action that you can take, right? So they can be extremist also. So here there will be three kinds of actions: extremely good, which is going to be the idealistic action; the middle path, which is going to be the rational or neutral action; and extremely bad, which is going to be the notorious thing to do, right? So in the exam, due to scarcity of time, you should list down only three or maximum four possible courses of action. There might be a lot of other actions also, but you should restrict yourself into three or four possible courses of action. And when you are listing this down, you must mention their merits as well as demerits, right? So if you do that, you should mention at least two of merits and two of the demerits pertaining to every possible course of action. Now, merits and demerits have to be mentioned in terms of consequences of the actions that you are suggesting that you should take and the values which are being satisfied. For example, when you say that, let's say, I will give you a situation. So, there is a staff in your office, and that person has to pay for his child's school fee, right? And he has asked you for help. You don't have that kind of money, but on the same day someone else offers you a bribe. So if you take that bribe and give that bribe to the staff, he will be able to pay his child's school fees and his year will be saved, right? So here, if you look at this situation, on the one hand you have your integrity, and on the other hand you have an option to protect the person's, the child's childhood and education, right? So merits and demerits of every, whether you take the bribe, whether you don't take the bribe, how do you help the child, right? So all the possible courses of action that you have will have certain merits and demerits, right? And you have to mention those. So someone has asked something in the chat box. While mentioning all courses of action, should merits and demerits be done in the same set or next para? That's up to you. That's something that I cannot dictate. Right? Okay. So now an innovative way to show possible courses of action is there in the next slide, right? Here we have a flow chart. So what you can do is talk to the concerned person to give him an opportunity to explain his stand. If he doesn't agree, talk to his superior to take corrective action. If he too doesn't agree and it appears that they are complicit in the wrongdoing, take the evidence and write to the vigilance cell of the department. And in the last step, you have follow up with your complaint and be ready to face any adverse consequences that might arise. So this is with respect to a particular situation. And this, I have just listed these down so that, you know, you're escalating in every step, right? So if there is a person in your office who is not responding and who is not correcting your his wrongdoings, so what should you do? The first step, talk to that person and let him explain. Second, he's still not agreeing, talk to his superior, let him take the corrective action. If he is also not agreeing and it appears that both of them are involved in the wrongdoing, you take the evidence and write to the vigilance cell of the department, right? And after doing that, you follow up on your complaint, and if you face any adverse consequences, then you should be ready to face it, right? So these are the sequential steps. You are escalating the possible courses of action in every step that you are taking, right? So this flow chart like this you can use in showing the possible courses of action that you might want to take in a particular case study, right? So now in the next slide we will discuss about what frameworks you can use to brainstorm possible courses of action. So there can be a lot of other frameworks. I have just mentioned here a few frameworks which are generic in nature and you can possibly use those. So the first one is Pestle Hick. So this is an acronym for political, economic, social, technological, legal, environmental, humanistic, international, and cultural. So, whatever courses of action that you are planning to take, just identify them from these particular aspects, right? Another framework that I can suggest is STIHAGS. It's basically an acronym for security, technical, environmental, historical, administrative, geographic, and scientific, right? So every word in this particular framework might not be applicable to your case study. So these are just pointers for your brain to think in a particular direction and identify whatever points you are able to generate at that point in time. Because if you don't have such frameworks ready to think in the exam, you will be blank. And if you become blank in the exam hall, then your paper will not be complete, right? So keep these frameworks handy. Another one that is there is think in terms of social levels, right? So as an individual or as a family, what is important? As a community and as a society, you will have a different set of values which are important. As a professional, you will have different values, and at the same time, for your workplace, there will be a different set of values which will be important. What is important for a person at the local city level, what is important at the state level, national level, regional level, at the governmental level, and at the global level. So this is how you escalate your possible courses of action depending on which level of the society you are thinking about, right? So while you are mentioning the possible courses of action, you may want to mention causes, responses, and solutions to the issues. So this is basically just a pointer so that if you don't have much content, you can also mention these things, right? The causes, responses, and solutions to the issues that you are highlighting. Okay, now we move on to the step 5. The step 5 is choosing a particular course of action, right? So you clearly mention which course of action it is that you are choosing. You have to specify its merits and you also have to specify its demerits. And in your chosen courses of action, you always have to give possible solutions to address the demerits. Unless you do that, your answer is not going to be complete, right? So the chosen course of action has to be ethical as well as it has to be practical. If it is not practical, then you might not fetch more marks because your solutions are not implementable, right? And don't take an extreme course of action unless the situation warrants. For example, even a terrorist's human rights cannot be violated by us till the law punishes him, right? You all of you might remember Kasab's case, right? So even in that situation, you have to be driven by the correct values. And in your courses of action, escalate progressively. I have already given you an example from persuasion gradually to the punitive course of action, right? Now, finally, we come to the step 6, which is concluding your case study. Right. So here you have to mention that whatever your course of action, your final chosen course of action is, which are the values that have been upheld by that course of action? What are the benefits if you take that decision? And you have to justify your stand why you have chosen that as the best among all possible alternatives. For that, you have to give proper reasoning. And finally, also mention any pitfalls in the course of action that have been mentioned that should be kept in mind, right? Okay, so this is about the structure. We will also discuss a few other pointers that I have highlighted. So just give me a second. Right. So UPSC is not only asking situation based case studies anymore, right? Or administrative case studies. There was a time when UPSC would ask very simple case studies based on current affairs that had happened or, administration related case studies. So there used to be case studies on disaster management and there's a flood, you are the DM, what are you going to do? In the recent train mishap, UPSC could have asked you a question on that, right? But now focus has shifted to analysis of major issues and business oriented case studies as well, right? So you have to be prepared according to the kind of case studies that are being asked in recent times. So the questions which are asked in the case study need to be addressed. You have to modify whatever process I have explained so far according to the kind of question that has been asked, right? Another thing, so in all the case studies, don't go from step 1 to step 6. Only answer what has been asked in the question. If stakeholders or possible courses of action have not been asked, do not write that portion because there are no marks for it, right? So now finally there's a note on time management, which is basically you have to keep 105 minutes for section B, right? You are definitely going to overshoot that time. So what you have to do is you have to practice doing every case study in maximum 17 minutes, right? So first read the questions before going through the case study so that you can sift the data required to address what has been asked rather than reading the case study in entirety. So as I said, when you read the case quickly, then go through the questions also and then do the second reading. So scan the case study quickly and underline what can be used to answer the questions which have been asked, right? Okay, thank you so much. That's it for today's session, and I will communicate to you. You have to attempt one case study, which we'll be discussing in the next session. and we'll try to see how to tackle a case study using a particular example, right?